We've put together a series of video tutorials to help you get started with creating forms and workflows. The tutorials are designed so you can follow along and try the techniques yourself. You can use the navigation controls at the bottom to pause, rewind, or forward the video at any time. This tutorial shows you how to create rich, sophisticated forms. You'll need to be logged into Frevvo, either cloud or on-premise, using a designer account. As a designer, you'll notice that Frevvo organizes your forms and workflows in applications. An application simply groups together related forms, workflows, and other items. You can name an application by editing its properties. To create a new form, click New. In the wizard that appears, you can select a template to use as a starting point if your administrator has installed them. We'll start with a blank form. The main Form Designer screen appears. Before we start designing, let's take a quick tour of the Form Designer. On the right is the main canvas, where you actually design the form. At the top left, there's a rich palette of controls. The standard HTML controls: text, text area, drop-down, radio, and checkbox. In addition, there are predefined controls like email, money, and phone, several grouping controls like sections, repeats, and tables, and other controls like messages, links, and uploads. We'll take a look at several of these as we go along. Below that is the custom palette. You can create your own controls by combining standard Frevvo controls and publish them for later use. Below that is the Properties panel. It shows the properties of whatever you happen to have currently selected. Right now, we have no controls, so it's showing the properties of the form as a whole. The Data Sources panel is an advanced topic and will be covered in a separate video tutorial. Let's create our first form. In the Form Properties panel, change the form name to Client Information. Now, drag a section control from the palette and drop it into the canvas on the right. Notice as you drag, an icon at the top right will indicate where the item will drop. The section will have a default label. Click the label and it becomes editable. Change it to Client Information. Now we'll add controls to the section. Drag a text control from the palette and drop it inside the section. Click the label and change it to First Name. Notice that the Properties panel at left now shows the properties of this control. Check the required property at the bottom. See that the control background color changes to indicate that it is required. In the Properties panel, click on the Style tab and set the width to 6 grid columns using the selector at the top. We'll discuss grid columns and layouts in more detail later in this tutorial. Drag another text control from the palette and drop it to the right of First Name. Make sure the icon indicator at top right shows a right arrow before you drop. See that the control drops to the right and is automatically 6 grid columns wide, so it fits to the right of First Name. Change the label to Last Name. You can click on the label or change it in the Properties panel, and check the required property once again. Now, drag and drop an email and phone control to the right. Change their labels to email address and phone number respectively. Experiment with drag and drop. You can drop to the right, left, above, or below most controls. When you drop to the right or left, the new control has the same width as the control you're dropping on. If you drop above or below, the new control is always 12 columns wide. Now, drag and drop a date control above this section. The icon while dragging should show an upward pointing arrow. Change the label to today's date. A variety of date formats are available, but we suggest leaving this setting at automatic. Notice that you can change the control type to date, time, or date time for different functionality. Click the Style tab in the Properties panel and change the width to 3 grid columns. Now select the email address control. In the Properties panel, change the error message to "You must enter a valid email address." If the user enters invalid data, this error message will be displayed. Set the hint to enter a valid email address, and help to email address must be entered in a valid format. See that the hint message shows up on hover and the help content causes a help icon to appear. Clicking the icon displays your help text. This text can contain any valid, well-formatted HTML. Now let's add a form action. This controls what the user sees when the form is submitted. Click on the What Does the User See icon in the toolbar. The form action wizard appears. Click on the Display Message wizard. In the message box, enter "Thank you first name, last name" for your submission, and then click Finish. First name and last name are examples of templates. Templates are specified by surrounding the name of a control in your form with curly braces. Live forms will use the values entered into the first name and last name fields by the user to dynamically create the display message. Finally, click the Save and Exit icon to save your work. Let's try out this form. Click the test icon for your form. See that the form appears in a pop-up window. You can fill out the date using the date picker or type it in using a variety of formats, for example, month, date, year. Fill in first and last names. Empty controls displaying a yellowish background are required. Required controls must contain valid data in order to submit a form. When you click the Submit button, any invalid fields will be highlighted with an orange background color. You must enter or correct the data in these fields in order for the form to be submitted. For email address, if you make a mistake, you will see that Frevvo immediately tells you that there is an error. The error message we configured earlier is displayed. The phone number must also follow one of the patterns allowed, or an error message will be displayed. When all fields are valid, click the Submit button to submit the form. The display message we configured will appear. If you want to see how the form will look on a tablet or smartphone, close the window, click the test icon again, then click the tablet or smartphone buttons at the top of the test screen. Now let's add an Order Line Items grid to the client information form we just created. Edit the client information form to open the Form Designer. In the Properties panel, change the form name to Order Information. Drag and drop a table below the client information section created earlier. Live forms will automatically create a grid with 3 columns and 3 rows. Drag a drop-down from the palette and drop it into the right of column 0 in the table. Then click the left arrow at the top of the column we just added to move it to the left into the first column position. Click the header of this drop-down control, and in the Properties panel, change the label and name to Item. Make sure both label and name are set to Item. Click the actual drop-down control in any row. In the Properties panel, set the options to Chevrolet, Chrysler, and Ford. Make the control required. Select the next column, column 0, by clicking the header. Change the label to Price, dollar symbol, and name to Price. Click one of the price controls in any row, and in the Properties panel, change the control type to Money. Select the next column, column 1. Change the label and name to Quantity. Here's a little shortcut. After changing the label, simply delete the name and tab out. Live forms will set the name automatically from the label. Click one of the quantity controls in any row, and in the Properties panel, change the control type to Quantity. Select the last column, column 2, and change the label to Subtotal dollar amount and name to Subtotal. Click one of the subtotal controls, and in the Properties panel, change the control type to Money. Now select the entire table by clicking on the header bar above all the columns. Change the label to Order Items. The name should automatically get set to Order Items. Change the min to 1. This means at least one order line item is required. Set the max to 5, meaning you can have at most 5 line items. You can set this to whatever you want. Click the Style tab and set the column widths to the string 40%, 20%, 20%, 20%. This will resize the columns of the table. You can set it to any combination of values, as many values as columns in the table, that add up to 100%. Finally, drag and drop a money control below the table. Change the label to Grand Total. The name will be set to Grand Total. You can change the width to whatever you want. In the Properties panel, disable this control by unchecking Enabled. Click Save and Exit to save your work. Let's try out this form. Click Test as before and fill out the top part as we did before. See that the first row of the table is required. You can add rows up to the max you set earlier, and you cannot remove the last remaining row. The money and quantity controls will only accept values that make sense for their types. Now let's take a look at business rules. Rules are written using JavaScript. Click the rules icon on the toolbar. Create a new rule and click Edit It. Change the name of the rule to Initialize Form. In the rule area, type the rule as follows. If form.load, curly brace, today's date.value equals frevvo.currentDate, curly brace. See that the editor can autocomplete rules for you. Today's date is the name of the date control at the top of the form. You can see the list of control names in the Form Outline panel in the Rules canvas. If you make a mistake, the editor will turn pink to let you know, and the error is displayed at the bottom. With this rule in place, when the end user first starts using the form, the date control at the top will be set to today's date. No need for the user to type it in. Let's create a more complex rule to calculate the subtotals and grand total. First, go back to the Form Designer. Select the subtotal column by clicking on the header and uncheck Enabled. The entire column is grayed out. Return to the Rules editor and create a new rule. The content of the rule is shown below. We loop over the items and compute and set the subtotal for each item. Finally, we compute and set the grand total. Save your work and test it out. See that the date is automatically pre-filled. The subtotal for each line item and the overall grand total are automatically calculated and updated. In practice, the price would probably come from a back-end database. Once again, that information can be retrieved dynamically using a rule. The debug console below shows the results of the rule execution in test mode, so it's easy to find and fix errors. Rules do require some technical knowledge. However, they are usually quite simple and are thoroughly documented in the Frevvo documentation. On the Rules example page, you will find many examples, and it's very likely that one of the examples will show you how to do exactly what you need. The Rules engine is very powerful. You can perform many dynamic actions like showing, hiding parts of the form, automatically filling in user information, connecting to backend systems, etc. Let's take a more detailed look at some of the controls in the palette. Most of them are easy and intuitive to use. Radio, checkbox, and dropdowns are all selection controls. Radio and dropdown allow a single selection, while checkbox allows for multiple selections. Drag and drop any of these into the Form Designer. See that the Properties panel shows the options. You can set these options as desired. Options follow the format value equals label. If you do not provide a value, live forms will infer one from the label. Labels can contain spaces, long text, arbitrary characters, etc. When the form is submitted, it's the value at left that is actually submitted. Each of these controls also has a comment property. Check the comment checkbox in the Properties panel and provide a number of rows for the comment area. If you do so, the last option behaves like an other Please specify choice. If the user selects this option, a comment box will appear below asking the user to provide details. It's a commonly used pattern seen in many business forums. You may have radios and checkboxes with many choices. Sometimes you want to lay them out horizontally rather than one below the other. To do this, simply check on the Style tab in the Properties panel and set the item width in percent. For example, if you set 25%, you'll notice that 4 choices fit side by side. Drag and drop an upload control from the palette onto the form. This control allows the user to upload one or more files as attachments. You can specify the minimum number of files, the max number of files, the max size of any file that may be uploaded, and the types of files that this upload control will accept. When used on a mobile device, the upload control allows the user to take a photo and attach it, for example, a restaurant receipt or accident photo. Drag and drop a message control from the palette onto the form. The message body can contain any well-formatted HTML, for example, bold text, list of instructions, text in different colors, etc. Notice that this control has a message type property. Experiment with the various types of messages to see what they look like. If you choose one of these standard types for your messages, Live Forms will automatically format them, display a decorator, and lay out a nice-looking message on all devices. Of course, you can customize these using the properties available to you in the Style tab. Drag and drop a repeat control from the palette onto the form. You can drop any other control into the repeat, for example, a simple control like a phone or a complex section containing many other controls. Whatever you drop into the repeat becomes repeating. The user can add more than one instance. The Properties panel displays minimum and maximum properties. If the minimum is greater than 0, the control becomes required. A repeating control automatically displays plus and minus icons so the user can add or remove items. Test the form. Since the minimum is 1, the first repeating item or section is required. You will have to enter a last name and email. Click plus to add a second and a third. Notice that these are optional, so the submit is enabled and there is no visual indication that any controls are required. Now enter something into first name in the second section. Notice that the other fields are now required so that the containing section remains valid. As you might imagine, this can get very complex. You can even have multiple levels of repeats. A repeating section can itself contain another repeating section, and so on. The validation requirements that this creates are incredibly complicated, but you don't have to worry about them. Live Forms takes care of the details for you, and you can be certain that when the form is submitted, it is valid with respect to the criteria defined by the designer. You can try dragging and dropping some or all of the other palette controls onto the form to see what they do. They're quite intuitive, and you can read more details in the palette controls section of the documentation. As we saw before, Live Forms uses a 12-column grid for laying out controls that makes it very easy to create responsive layouts that adjust to the device. Let's try it out. Drag and drop a text control from the palette into the form. You can name it whatever you want, but set the width to 6 columns. See that it takes up half the space in the form. As we saw earlier, dropping another control to the right of this text control causes it to also take up 6 columns. Of course, you can adjust this, but Live Forms is guessing that you're trying to create a 2-column layout. In this manner, drop several controls to the right and see that you can create a 2-column layout. It's easy to create arbitrary layouts. It should be easy to figure out how the grid works. Any number of controls up to a total width of 12 columns will fit next to each other in the form. You can have any combination as shown above. 6 plus 6, 4 plus 4 plus 4, 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, 2 plus 2 plus 8, 5 plus 4 plus 3, etc. Live Forms will lay them out automatically and make sure they align nicely. Pause the video and experiment a bit. Don't want a control to float up next to another one? Click the Style tab and check the New Line property. That's it. the control will always be displayed on a new line. Panels are grouping controls that can contain other nested controls, but they're not visible to the end user on the form. Drag and drop a panel onto the form. See that it defaults to 6 columns in width, but you can change it in the Style tab. Within the panel, the interior area again has 12 columns, and you can fit controls into a panel using the same rules above, irrespective of the width of the panel. Try it out yourself. Once again, it's intuitive and obvious after a bit of experimentation. Live forms will automatically alter the layout for mobile devices. Tablets have enough screen real estate that the form layout is essentially unchanged. The controls may appear different so as to look natural on the tablet, but the 12-column grid layout is preserved. On a smartphone, live forms will lay out your controls as if the screen only has 4 columns. If a control is wider than 4 columns, it will shrink to 4 columns. Again, the best approach to learning this is to simply try it. Signing forms is one of the most common business requirements. With live forms, you can sign in one of 2 ways. Drag and drop a signature control anywhere in the form and change its properties as usual. Digital signatures require authentication and can be applied to any section in the form. Select the section and in the Properties panel, click on the Security tab. In the Signature property, select Text Signature Image. See that a Sign This Section button appears at the bottom of the section. If you check the Must Sign property, then the form cannot be submitted unless the section is signed. In the Signature property, you can also select Wet Signature and check the Must Sign property. Test the form. For the regular signature control, the user simply clicks or touches the control. A box pops up for the user to sign. The signature is displayed on the form and also on the form PDF. No authentication is required. Try clicking the Sign This Section button in both sections and see how it gets signed, but in different ways. When a section is digitally signed, it is locked and can no longer be edited. If you wish to change any value, you must click Edit this section, change the value, and sign it again. Signing generates a digital signature based on the data. The signature can be used later to validate that the data has not been tampered with. Let's take a look at the form level properties. Click the header in the designer and the form properties are displayed in the Properties panel. When Save is checked, the form submission is saved to the Live Forms repository. If you uncheck this, then the data will not be saved by Live Forms and you will not be able to view your submissions online. You may wish to uncheck this for security reasons. If Save PDF is checked, a PDF print view of the form is also saved to the Live Forms repository, and you can view this PDF in your submissions. Printable causes a print icon to be displayed at the top left of the form. When clicked, a printable PDF is generated. Save Load displays a save icon so the user can save and return to the form later. This is particularly useful for lengthy forms. CAPTCHA is used to prevent spam submissions. If checked, a CAPTCHA is displayed when the user clicks Submit on the form. The form can only be submitted upon successful completion of the CAPTCHA. Live Forms provides many more properties and settings. You can learn about most of these simply by experimenting in the Form Designer, and the properties are also detailed in the documentation. Live Forms provides many options for you to control what happens when your form is submitted. Doc Actions control what happens to the data. The wizards are accessible from the Form Designer toolbar. Click the icon and you'll see a number of options. Let's try the Email Wizard. Click this button and a wizard pops up. You can specify email addresses and each one can be dynamically set from the form data. Select the email address control for the To field. In Send Snapshot, select PDF. A PDF view of the form will be attached. Leave Send Data checked. An XML file containing the form data will also be attached. Click Next. The subject and content of the email can also be specified, and you can format these as desired. Experiment with using controls in the form as templates via the drop-downs. Click Finish and save your form. When the form is submitted, Live Forms will send an email with the configured subject, content, and data attachments. Form actions control what the user sees. The wizards are also accessible from the Form Designer toolbar. Click the icon and you'll see a number of options. We already tried the Display a Message wizard earlier. As you can see, there are several other actions. Error actions are similar to form actions, but allow you to, for example, display a different message when an error occurs. You can learn more in the Form and Doc Action Wizards chapter of the documentation. Frevvo forms also work in all languages worldwide, letting you create complex forms that meet real-world business requirements. The sophisticated drag-and-drop designer is easy to use, and the comprehensive set of features means you can create any form or workflow that you need. Thanks for watching. Please visit our website and contact our team to learn more about how you can start implementing game-changing solutions today.